Max and Josh originally brought the idea of Max Brooks doing this talk to me and to the rest of the committee. Max Brooks had just written World War Z and Zombie Survival Guide. And they just were so enthusiastic and so sure. And they brought the idea of this program, which we had to come up with a way to talk about it, because as far as we could tell, something like this had never been done. Oh God, how am I going to convince the board to do this like silly program, this fun thing? And so we decided to call it a comedic lecture, because we think if we put the word lecture in it, it will add like a little air of seriousness. So I bring this program, and it's really well organized and thoughtful, and I tell the, my committee members to come. It didn't cost very much, and we're gonna do this event in Alumni Hall, and we think there's gonna be about 500 people, and it passes. We had expected about 500 people, and 2,000 students show up. And for us, that was such a big deal for my committee. So it's after the event now, and we had set up a book signing. And there's this huge long line because all these people had come that we didn't expect. And so I'm walking up and down the line, talking with students, and I'm assuring, they're asking me, is he gonna stay? Is there a limit? What if will he not sign? Will he not take pictures? What are the rules? They're really nervous that he's gonna leave. Just talking with students and saying, he's gonna stay. If you'll stay in this line and you'll stand here, he will wait. He assures us. I just asked him all these things. And as I'm doing this, this student, he catches me. And this guy, he is dressed, no joke, I kid you not, like a Viking. But he takes my hands really gently, like this. Like he takes them in his and kind of surrounds my hands. And if you've ever had a stranger touch your hands, it's a really weird, intimate, but sort of disconcerting feeling. So I've got this Viking holding my hands. And he says, thank you. And I was so taken aback. I said, well, for what? He said, for doing this. For doing something for people like me. That he had spent 4 years on this campus and never really felt like he belonged. And I looked around, and lots of other students had come in costume or dressed up in some way, or maybe they just were kids that were on the outskirts or didn't feel like they had friends. And for that one day, my committee made that Viking feel at home here. And to me, if that's not what Union Board is, making students feel like this experience matters and like they have a place here, then I don't know what it is.
Everyone knew the Indiana Memorial Union. This was the biggest, the best. The Union Board was fantastic.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand that Indiana University wouldn't be the place it is today without the Indiana Memorial Union and without Union Board. This institution has created a community center on this campus, unlike any other part of this campus. It's a common place for every member of the IU family to feel like they belong.
I think the history of Union Board, and it's going back over 100 years, is that search for connection. And my board was an eclectic group of people from all sorts of walks of life with different goals, but the commonality was that we saw an opportunity to do something.
I think the experience that you get is invaluable. The insight to campus, the leadership development, people who can become lifelong friends is not something that every organization offers you. That opportunity to lead, to manage a budget, to get to know yourself, to challenge the way you think.
If you're a student here at Indiana University and you've got a great idea or a great cause or some sort of great event, this is the place where you can make that happen.
I got so much. I met my wife on Union Board. All the people in my wedding party were from Union Board. I've gotten so much from not only Union Board, but the building and sort of this is home. This is IU.
The Union is the heart of the campus, and no tour is complete without it.
I took a lot of tours of Union, but my tours were following students with their parents, with their friends, and when they said, this is where we, then you know you have made the connection. And that's important for the Union, and it's extremely important for the university, because that means there's something here that they connect to.
The story of the Indiana Memorial Union and Union Board begins with the early years of the 20th century. Indiana University was establishing itself as an academic pioneer of the Midwest. IU was building and growing. But there was a concerning obstacle that could have long-term detrimental effects on the growth of the university. The students were not getting along.
You know, they used to have these class scraps where the freshmen would fight the sophomores, and they would have basically a big, not quite a riot, but close to it.
Just prior to 1909, it was a community where freshmen hated the sophomores, and this group hated that group.
There was this kind of ongoing issue of who's in charge of students, who speaks for students, who is the student representative. This idea of a student union, one group that was a union of all of the students, had started to spread around the country and had become a little bit of this idea that if you put all the students together in one union, then they have some power to talk as one voice to the faculty, to talk as one voice to the administration.
In the fall of 1909, John Wittenberger was a student attending Indiana University. Wittenberger was a young man with unique life experiences. He had already spent time studying at the University of Michigan and had spent time working as a principal in his hometown of Peru, Indiana. Wittenberger was deeply troubled by the polarized student body. He recalled the University of Michigan having a student union and imagined that a student union at IU could be a way to ease tensions between students and be a unifying organization for the entire campus. With the blessing of the university's administration, Wittenberger launched the first union board at Indiana University, with Wittenberger himself serving as president.
But he really wanted to create this new form of organization where the men of Indiana University could fraternize and socialize and, have good, clean fun, basically. And so that's the beginning of that. And so he started with some of his friends, and then within a year, there were 500 members of the union.
The Union Board started back in 1909 without a building. And it wasn't until the late 20s that the first building was completed. So here again is the emphasis on the students, student development, student bringing programs to the campus.
To serve the campus community, committees were formed to best represent the student body and stimulate the campus experience. Some of those committees still exist today.
The film series goes back to 1914. It's the longest campus-run, continuous film series in the country, probably the world, back to 1914, and it's still going strong. That doesn't happen unless you get students involved in doing the programming and saying, we really need this in today's world. And that's part of what makes it cool, and part of what makes it a really wonderful and enriching experience is the students get to figure that out.
Tragically, 1 year later, after being the visionary behind the formation of Union Board, John Wittenberger contracted typhoid fever and fell gravely ill. He passed away on September 26, 1910.
I think it's interesting to think about how John Wittenberger, who didn't know what he started, but he really is a very important guy. He was the spark plug. He was the guy who really pushed it. It's really great to be able to honor him, through various ways, including the Wittenberger Auditorium, which is a really nice auditorium here in the Union.
As good fortune would have it, Union Board had an important and influential ally in President William Bryan. Bryan appreciated the value a student union brought to the campus and was quoted as saying, "The union should be a great force, making toward unity of university spirit and life."
So William Lowe Bryan, as a student growing up here in the community, he very much was invested in Indiana University knowledge and life and understanding of issues.
His idea was that you need to have a focus on the whole student, not just the intellectual qualities, but the moral qualities and the social qualities. To develop that, and if you can control the environment, the campus environment, then that's good. So he was always looking for ways to engage the students in constructive activities. And he saw that the union movement and the union board and the union ideal was really could have been a very positive thing, and he wanted to continue that positivity.
The Union Board was successfully impacting the campus community. The next step for the board? Creating a home.
The Indiana Daily Student had started a project in the 1890s where they had started keeping a record of all of the students that were serving in the Spanish-American War. And that led to, hey, what if we kept a list, who were all the students that served in the Civil War? Well, what if we had a list of every student that has served in the military? And by the early 1910, 1911 or so, what was known as the honor roll of former students, or the soldiers' honor roll, was getting floated around the university. Somebody had the idea that, what if we went back to this crowdsourcing thing and asked people to give donations to build a memorial? And what if that memorial was a student union? They went forward and started raising money, and rather quickly raised way more money than anybody expected to raise.
Once they started planning for the union building as part of the Memorial Fund campaign, that was part of the idea of really being able to have a union from the ground up that will serve students in all kinds of different ways: food, socializing, modest hotel, things like that.
Articles from the Indiana Daily Student show how the Indiana Memorial Union was initially intended to be a meeting place exclusively for men. But by 1932, when the IMU was near completion, cultural shifts relating to women's rights led the union to be open to all students. President Bryan was very involved with many of the details of the building, including the inscription that remains in the building today. The Indiana Memorial Union Building was formally opened to the public on May 4th, 1932.
By 1932, the union is dedicated to sons and daughters of Indiana University who served in the wars of the Republic. And the memorial piece of it is the Golden Book. All the sons and daughters who served in the wars from 1932 back. We've also since added the World War II names. And it includes both the Blue Stars, those that served, and the Gold Stars, which are those that died in service.
By 1937, President William Bryan's tenure came to an end. Bryan oversaw spectacular growth at IU, with an increase in enrollment and the expansion of the campus from 50 acres to 137. Replacing Bryan would be a huge undertaking, but there was a man already on campus perfectly suited for the job: Herman B Wells.
And so Wells was a very unusual person, very gregarious, very friendly, very socially astute. He demonstrated that as a high school student. When his fellow seniors voted him the best all-round boy and the funniest boy. So Wells was the treasurer of the union board, which was a natural thing for him to be doing because he was involved in everything. In fact, his grades suffered. He was a straight-A student in high school, and when he got to college, he was a decent student, but he was like a C+ student or a B student. And so, but he really focused on the extracurriculars, and that really led to all kinds of different things.
He had the ability to, when you were meeting with him, to give you the feeling that you were the most important person in the world. I mean, he really connected with you on a personal level. Anytime there was something happening here at the Union, he would show up. He attended, I think, just about every Union Board alumni reunion, which was every 2 years, but he was always there to support. This building, what you see in this building, the feel of this building, I think, is a reflection of Chancellor Wells. He was a very special man.
When I had several meetings with Herman B Wells, and to get his perspective. And we had some tough issues that we talked about. And never once did he give me what I should do, but always steered the conversation to make me think from different angles, to help make a decision, or to go and speak to someone else about, how can you get more feedback to make a well thought out decision.
Herman was deeply invested in the union, and that was part of his charm as a leader, was that he had that personal stake in the success of almost everything on this campus. And he saw the union as a place, we used to call it the community center of campus, or the living room of campus, where he envisioned people, not just students, but faculty, staff, townspeople, coming together to share in a program or a film or a meal to build that sense of community that he wanted students to have. He built the auditorium so that people would come from the smallest towns in Indiana and see the world before them. But the union was to make them feel at home.
Just intellect and the legacy that he left, which is still remembered on this campus everywhere you go. Just walking around the union, he's everywhere.
This was shortly before he passed away. He came up to the Federal Room, this room, and he said, "I'd like to share some stories with you." And I said, "Absolutely." And so we sat down, and first thing he said, "I never let facts get in the way of a good story." And I said, "Well, that's fine." I said, "Chancellor, I don't understand, where did all of these chests come from?" He said, "Well, when I was president and I got tired and I needed to get away, I would get Claude Rich, who was former director of the Alumni Association, and Claude and I would go south to Kentucky. And we would, my thing was buying antiques. I would say, "Well, I'll take that." And they said, "Well, Chancellor, you just took one of those last year." He said, "That's all right, I'll take it." He said, "I didn't have any place to put all this, and so I just put it in the union."
The heart and soul of President Wells can be witnessed throughout the campus. And Wells's love of art and furniture is especially evident in the Indiana Memorial Union.
Wells was on a long trip, and I think he was flying into Spokane, Washington, which is in eastern Washington. And there's a really palatial, giant hotel, 500 rooms.
And it was there in a grand hotel on the river that he saw a fireplace, a hearth, a perpetual flame that meant a lot to him and felt like home. And that is why in the South Lounge we have a hearth, a fireplace that is always burning. It's, letting students and alumni know you've always got a place here. We want the union to be the living room of the campus.
He always says, I use this a lot, that everywhere the eye rests, it should see something of beauty, which is nice.
Sometime around 1920, the Indiana Memorial Union launched its art collection, beginning with works from Hoosier-born and Impressionist painter T.C. Steele. Today, the art gallery throughout IMU is one of the more treasured assets of the building and known to feature a piece of art at every turn.
To have all that art, it was like an education in the state of Indiana as you walk through the building.
I would say Alma Mater is one of my favorites, and it's the huge allegorical painting outside of Starbucks. It was painted in honor of Charlotte Lowe Bryan. It was given by William Lowe Bryan. So he commissioned the artist to paint the painting, and so it's got there's a knight in there and has a little IU on it. There's a dragon eating books so kind of showing the story of getting rid of knowledge, and then there's Alma Mater rising up with the angels. The Tudor room was made to reflect that Tudor kind of historic English look. Herman Wells wanted a room that would be the dining room for Indiana University, and this is that room. It's hand block printed wallpaper. It's Parisian, and he loved this wallpaper.
Part of what our mission is to build that sort of art presentation and programming into the everyday life of the student and the campus.
It really is a very, very special place. A good union, has to be comfortable. It has to be welcoming.
I grew up here. This is the place that is my home. It always will be. Heart is right here in the Union building. Not just at IU, but right here.
We were helping a buddy of mine relocate. He was going to be working here in Bloomington. So I used it as an opportunity to take my middle son just to show him campus, some of Daddy's old stomping grounds. I took him up to the Union Board office, which is such a cool space, and it's like a funky venue with the couches and the floor and everything. It's amazing. It's just anytime you can come back to a place where it feels like home, I mean, why wouldn't you want to come back?
You know, I remember driving past it in the winter and seeing the giant candle on the side of the building, right? I went to a preschool just downtown, and we took a field trip one day to go to Sugar and Spice and get cookies. So I have memories of the building from when I'm, 5 or 6 years old. And I remember thinking it was a castle when I was a little kid, and I want to live in the castle someday. And then I kind of did in 2003. So
I've really enjoyed showing the building to my kids. Look, here's this painting that is hanging here in the Union. This was a gift from the board that your dad and I were on. Us and our memories in almost every corner of the building.
When I've seen alumni come back from 30, 40 years ago, they can still feel that connection back to the university because that was their spot and their location. A sense of connectedness is that we have these spaces where students feel this was my spot, this is where I was, this is where I could be me, this is where me and my friends got together.
I love some of the really quiet, I don't know if they're supposed to be study rooms, but there are these small rooms upstairs. Find that quiet space, especially for an introvert and internal processor like me. Sometimes I just need some silence. And so that was really helpful for me.
Well, I think one of the great things about the IMU is that it's this wonderful blend of both history and the current experience of students. You can see parts of the building that are gorgeous and probably will never be changed, and then you see parts of the building that change every couple years, right? That's what students want, that's what they demand, and they want the space to feel like it's their space while they're here, and I think the IMU does a great job of really blending that commitment to tradition, but also being relevant to the students that are using the building and its programs today.
The building, yes, it's iconic, but what happened inside this place, particularly with students, is the memory I take with me and remember, well, we did this program here, we had this happen here, and we did this, and those board meetings once a week. They were interesting always.
In 1952, Union Board merged with the Association of Women Students, allowing women to serve on the board for the first time. Women emerged as an important and influential voice for the union.
In 1952, Union Board, this male organization, merged with the Association of Women Students, AWS, and women came on board back then. That was 12 years before I was on board.
I remember being interviewed by Dean Lusk from the business school, who was such a gentleman and a gentleman, really, and was very encouraging in my interview. And Dean Schaefer, who was unequivocally probably the most gender blind person I ever met in my youth. He didn't care if you were female or male. Could you do the job? That's what his interest was. And how are you thriving at Indiana?
I'm delighted to tell you that it was another woman who approached me about standing for that office. She said I would have backing if I would run for the presidency. I also thought I could at least do a decent job with this. I was absolutely delighted at the support I had, particularly if you think that these directors on board, they stepped out. They really had guts to vote a woman in after this, all-male history.
Union Board was making strides and representing the student body, but there were some students who believed Union Board could perform even better by attracting participation from the broader campus community.
In the early 1970s, Union Board was called a programming board. It would program the activities using a small portion of the fee that was charged students to fund various programs. The board itself, though, was very insular. And so one of the things that I and some others tried to do was figure out how to make the Union Board more open to the student body generally, and also get more involved in the governance of the union building and all the full range of services that it was provided to students. I researched and I found that there was a constitution for the Union Board. It was actually for the union. It was the Indiana Memorial Union Constitution, which then had a board of directors, which was comprised of mostly students, this insular body that was self-perpetuating. The power to amend that constitution lay with the students. The students could, in a constitutional referendum, make the changes. And therefore, the authority of the board in that constitution didn't just go to programming, it went to the entire union and its operation. That really was a landmark change in the board, and I can tell you that the controversy and the opposition among the factions of the board was tremendous. Years and years later, I went back to one of the reunions for the Union Board. I think it was the 50th reunion. And one of the individuals that had led the charge against what I was proposing and had really crafted the opposition alternative said that in the end, we were right, that the board was too insular. It needed to be opened up. The Union Board was made stronger, and it was made stronger because there were different views, and even though those views were in opposition to each other, in the end, the right decision was made, and the Union Board was stronger for it.
With a new constitutional amendment, Union Board ushered in an era of students focused on creating programs that captured the popular culture of the times.
I served on the film committee as a member while it was growing. I chaired something called Dusk Till Dawn when I was a board member. Was activities that lasted all night long in the union, drew tens of thousands. People really mobbed the place till 4 or 5 in the morning, which was unusual in those days. And then I served a year as board president. And it happened to be the 1 year in Union Board films when we ran films 7 nights a week. Different themes, dinner and a movie, classics, first runs. It was a real adventure.
I got to cover some of the concerts, and it was a great lineup that year. There was Neil Diamond and Jackie DeShannon, Ike and Tina Turner My seats ended up being behind the IU basketball team, and when Tina came out and her looked like only beads, I really couldn't see any more of the show because they were all so tall in front of me. But my contact at the IU News Bureau, Zola Levitt, said, I kept saying, Zola, how do these great concerts happen? And he said, oh, it's the union board. When I went to an activity fair for the start of my second semester, and there was union board. And I thought, well, I'm not covering things this semester. Maybe I could see how the cake is baked, you know? Maybe I could go behind the scene.
That year, we had a blockbuster lineup. The Rolling Stones, The Who, Elvis, Carole King, Rod Stewart, Edward Albee, Truman Capote, Art Buchwald. Well, people used to say, how did you get this when there's Market Square Arena? They didn't build Market Square to handle the weight of the speakers and the lighting grid that the big acts wanted. So they were willing to come here because they could reach the same audience. So the union was like social media. It's where you came to meet people, to see people, everything from the old-fashioned ride board. People put a card up on the board about wanting a ride to California. Somebody else would come along and pick it up and call them. Those were the way that connections were made.
The rock festival the union board sponsored in the old 10th Street Stadium, the lineup was B.B. King, Jefferson Airplane, the Byrds, and Richie Havens. We had various jobs. Obviously, mine was to make sure Grace Slick got from her trailer about 50 feet over to the steps to the stage, where another union board person would make sure she got up and on the stage. And the rest of the group was up there, and Grace hadn't come out, so, you know, we sent word to her trailer, time to come out. So she came out, she came down the steps. I thought, man, I've got the easiest job here ever. And she hit the bottom of the steps, turned a sharp left, and I am not kidding, walked smack into the side of her trailer. I don't think I had fully absorbed that mind-altering drugs were involved already, but they did a great concert, so apparently that they were used to that.
We were doing the disco, the Club Lautrec. The frangipani room was packed. The music dies. A fuse in the amplifier has burned out. And the student director in charge runs up to me and says, I know where I can get one. You got a car, let's go. And so we jump in my car and we drive. The house is dark. He runs up, knocks on the door, and then I see him go around the back. And then he comes running back, and I said, well, did you get it? I didn't think anybody was home. He said, well, there wasn't. I broke the window and jumped in and I stole the fuse, so we've got it. So we ran back, and on the way back, I'm realizing that we have just done a robbery to get a program to happen. But it worked, and it was a friend of his, so you know, that worked out fine.
Since I was overseeing Kiva programming, I got to come to the board and say, well, there's this group called the Gay Rights Alliance, and they'd like to use the Kiva. Okay, great. Some of the folks that heard it in the group then realized, oh, we've got to go to the state legislature and get this law about men can't dance with men repealed. Connections to larger issues, it was just fascinating. And so that would have been 72. I think they also hosted a speaker the next year who urged everyone, gay and straight, to come out of the closet.
We had a very diverse board, hard-headed people who wanted things their own way. And we were trying to serve the interests of people all across campus. And it was an education to me to think outside of my own experience and see what other people would bring to the table. And I've sort of carried that with me. Now I'm a general manager of the PBS and NPR stations, and we try to do the same thing that I learned during the union board.
One of the complaints women in the corporate world say is sometimes the guys don't listen to you. But in union board, our voices were just as heard as anybody else's. each had a committee, each had roles, and getting the job done was what really mattered.
The Indiana Memorial Union Building and Union Board were in sync with the pulse of the campus, but there were still more levels of success to be achieved. The success would be led from an unlikely figure, a high school student living in Durham, Oklahoma, which had a population of 35, with a 1966 high school graduating class of 7. That young man's name is Winston Schindel.
I didn't even know what a college union was. And I picked up the yearbook from Oklahoma State University, and there was a photo of the student union. I thought, what's that? I was coming from a town of 35 people in western Oklahoma, and I'd never seen a building like that because I didn't get far out of Durham, Oklahoma. And so I enrolled at Oklahoma State, went through orientation, and one of the directors, student directors there, was in front of the building talking about the building and talking about Union Board. And I said, I want to do that. My thought is if you don't succeed at first, try again. And I did, and finally got to be a chair and then president. And decided, that's when I discovered there really is a profession called college union. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a college union director. You know, this union is, in many respects, like a little city. From the standpoint of the different publics that you serve, our job is to connect people to Indiana University. And if we're successful, they will come back, and time again.
Winston Schindel, I feel really fortunate that I was on the board before he retired. We were his penultimate board. He and I developed a friendship over that year. He was sort of turned into a mentor of sorts for me, and I really appreciated that. As I was sort of wrapping up my time on the board, he encouraged me to think about going into student affairs. And then a couple of years later, I was starting to actually think about applying to master's programs, and I, sent him an email and said, hey, can we talk about this? And incredibly encouraging and supportive of the idea. He wrote recommendation letters for me. So I would say that certainly Union Board and my relationship with Winston are why I went and got a master's in student affairs at all, honestly.
Winston Schindel, the director of the union at the time, who always was very diplomatic, called me into his office one day. And I'm like, what did I do? Chris and his Oklahoma drawl, I don't normally do this, but I know you really want to be the lectures director, but this board needs a good president. And I feel that you would be a really good president. And I know that may be out of your comfort zone, but I really want you to think about it. And again, it was one of those scary moments, but I'm like, I need to do something that's different. I need to get out of my comfort zone. And here's someone of great stature and someone I respect who believes in me. And I ran for Union Board president, and I was chosen by the directors. And it turned out to be one of the most amazing experiences for myself personally, and I tried to convey that on Union Board.
To me, what my job always was challenge and support. It was always their creative ideas, not mine. They had the creativity always. My job was to sit down with them and say, now how do we get there? What resources do you need? So your dream could be made to come true, but what I would try to do was provide that challenge and say to you, what do you want? And what is it that you want to accomplish? If you accomplish that goal, then you raise the bar.
People like Winston Schindel and Don Luce were fantastic. The union can be treated as a business, or it can be treated as a home, really. And Winston, while he had the business side that he had to look at, he also treated the union with passion. He knew that it was really built not so much of limestone, but really of the people that came here every day. He had a great love and has a great love for this building, so much so that if there were a piece of paper on the ground, he would pick it up. You know, Don, who was in charge, he was the advisor for not only in charge overseeing all of Union Board, but also was the advisor for the officers. He treated us as adults and put me in my place more than once, and rightfully so. Sometimes you just need your cage rattled, and Don did that for me.
Any creative person needs resources. You need a place to do something. You need a place to bring people together to sort of experience, you know, this common experience that you're trying to share. And the building provided, you know, all those opportunities.
Coming to Indiana University, it was like culture shock for me. It was hard for me to really find my place, to really find my voice, to find out where I fit in. And one day I was walking through the Union, noticed in the Frangea painting room that they had sign-ups for Union Board committees. I didn't really know what Union Board was. As fate would have it, there was a video committee, and I was really interested in film production, but we had camcorders. And so I would go videotape my friends who were in African-American fraternities. I would go videotape what was called their neophyte step show, which was a really cool stylized dance, and each fraternity had different stylized dances that they performed. And we created a documentary called Steppin' Out, and it explored the step shows and the fraternities and the history and kind of like the cultural impact that step shows had. I really learned how to shoot and how to frame and how to edit and how to just overall tell a story from my experience working at Union Boards.
So the reason why I think I went from, you know, committee member, assistant director, all the way up to president is just because Union Board lets you do everything that you want to do and kind of gives you the freedom for it and gives you the space to do it. This freedom to really do something new and push the boundaries with design, but also with programs that we were doing and everything in between.
Okay, so let me tell you about Live from Bloomington. First of all, I have a prop. This was my album, or the year I did it. Maybe 100 or 150 people who contributed to make this happen. There was an album, look at this, wait. It was a coordinated effort between the graphic art department. We had a contest to design the cover. A student, Nadine Shipley, designed the entire campaign. So that all was coordinated and done by students and professors who advised them. We selected the best music we could of local artists. There were students, but there were also local performers. And then at the music school, there were student engineers who worked, sound engineers, who were assigned to each track. And you know, again, historically, back then, it was a really big deal to be able to get studio time and to actually get a good track. So at the end of the day, you know, people were able to take this as a real thing and be able to try and get a contract outside. If I were to get hit by a truck tomorrow, I will have lived a good life and I will have done what I need to do on earth because of Live from Bloomington. You know, I'm that proud of it.
The legacy of Live from Bloomington stands as one of the most significant accomplishments in the history of Union Board. Album proceeds have resulted in thousands of donations to the Hoosier Hills Food Bank, and a wide variety of independent bands have gained notoriety and exposure by having their work displayed on the albums.
I personally have to say that my best memory of college involves Winston. Winston, at one of our board meetings, picked up this album and he said, "This is quality. This is something real that people will be able to walk away with and talk about for years to come." Well done.
It's a real laboratory for learning. And that's probably the thing I miss most, is the interaction with students, and the thing that I enjoy most as I reflect on my career, watching and knowing that, keeping up with the students as they progress into their professions, and seeing them when they come back, hoping that maybe I had something to do with that.
But I was so fortunate to work with so many talented students. You ask what rewards people who work here get. It's years down the road when somebody comes back to you and says, thank you. You helped me accomplish something. I realize it now that my experience here really made me who I am, and you are part of that, and thank you. That's the greatest thank you anyone can get who has worked here.
The impact Union Board programs have had on the campus community is immeasurable, showcasing a diverse body of work that has entertained, engaged, and enlightened for over a century.
When something happens in this world we live in, they can react to it. One of the things I will never forget is when a Union Board alum who is a teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where there was that mass shooting, Kat Posada, the teacher and Union Board alum, reached out and said, hey, I could come to campus and speak, and Union Board was able to put together a lecture on short notice. The amount of meaning that came from that and the ability to really bring something special to the IU campus by having somebody who's an alum and who knows the campus and cares about it, but also can talk about what is that experience like. It is the kind of addition to that marketplace of ideas that you want to have on a college campus. And that helps make the college experience really special. Let's have her speak and let students process that and learn from that, and faculty and staff were there too. And let's also give her a chance to get to know some of the students on Union Board today and for them to learn from that as well. That was really a special time and a special moment, I think, for Union Board and for IU.
But I felt as the only African-American male on the board, that carried a certain responsibility. And I took it really, really seriously. Had the one of the Muslim student groups come to us and wanted to put on an event where they were highlighting the history of Islam in the United States. And they had just a series of, it was art, headstones, you name it. And I felt like it was cool to be able to sponsor or co-sponsor an event with an underserved group. But that was one where I thought it was a small event, but when I thought about who it served and what the purpose was, those are one of the things I'm really proud of.
I wanted to be like the voice for the voiceless. So going to a large, predominantly white institute and being a woman of color, and also seeing other people of color struggle in areas, it was just important to me that I created an environment where other people felt comfortable to also lead with other people that didn't look like them and actually believe in themselves. So while I was also a part of Union Board, I was also a part of the first food pantry that was on IU's campus.
The value of the education that I got at IU is not just the time I spent in the classroom or in the stacks. Understanding the key role that relationships play and finding your voice in a room of peers with differing opinions. I don't remember most of the exams I took. I don't remember what grades I got on papers that I submitted after staying up all night. What I do remember is having very heated discussions that were valid arguments on both sides about whether or not a program made sense for our students at that price at that time.
And so for me, Union Board was extremely helpful in helping me find my own voice, helping me tap into the things that made me unique, helping me understand when to share an idea, when to compromise. I'm not sure I would have had that experience in any other organization.
I was talking to agents, I was negotiating contracts, I learned how to delegate on Union Board. Yes, we have these great experiences, and yes, we meet wonderful friends and go through a lot together, but you also learn important life skills, job skills too.
I've run things with big budgets before, I mean, that's what transformed it for me. It wasn't about a line on a resume. It wasn't about being president. It was, you know, this confidence to come out and say, like, yeah, I can do that.
To be the first Black woman to hold this position is crazy. I always say to myself, if I could go back in time and I tell my younger self at like 10 years old, like, hey, like, you're gonna do really big things, like, you're gonna make history, you know? It's great that I've grown so much in that when I was in pursuit of becoming president, I was so confident that I could make this change and I would be in this position.
The story of the Indiana Memorial Union and Union Board is still being written today. This rich history is filled with memories and experiences that will last a lifetime.
As a committee member, the first person that I met, celebrity, was James Brown. But I was day of show, which was hospitality, day of show, and I had carefully planned every single aspect of the day, the catering, security, the picking up of the sound equipment, and I think we rented a piano that day. And I hadn't realized that somebody had to actually go pick up the performer. And so that left me. So I went to we got a limousine, the limousine met me, the entire drive to pick up James Brown. The limousine driver coached me on protocol for being in a limousine. Out from this 10-seater plane comes James Brown with his cape, with his pompadour hair, and nervous little me saying the wrong things every step of the way. I was like, Mr. Brown, it's a pleasure to meet you. Welcome to Bloomington. It was just all nerves.
My favorite story is John Malkin taking George Carlin back to the airport, running out of gas, being stuck on the highway on an off-ramp near the airport. Tow truck driver comes, he runs out of gas, he tells him his life story. It just is a story that goes on and on and on. You know, and it's an experience he'll never forget.
The crown jewel in my hat was, during my term, was Colin Powell. The fall of 2000, it was actually 1 week before the 2000 presidential election. And at the time, everybody was talking about the possibility that he would be nominated for Secretary of State. So we had a lot more press even than we would normally have for a lecture of that caliber here. The really exciting thing about it was he wanted to talk to the students, and he was all about the students and connecting with the students as much as he could while he was here.
At the end of my term, we had Cornel West ready to go for the 2004 lectures director, so I was invited back to do the introduction, got through his bio, was incredibly nervous. And then he walks on stage and says, I want to thank Sister Lydia for that kind introduction. And I was like, what a great way to, end this. To go out with Cornel West calling me Sister Lydia.
One of the most memorable things that happened while I was on the board was, since I was the only law student and we had a speaker series, as I believe they still do, and we had Justice Douglas, William O. Douglas, speak, and I got to do the introduction, got to have dinner with him. My wife and I had dinner with him, and it was a really memorable experience as he told stories and anecdotes about all the presidents he knew, from Franklin Roosevelt through then President Richard Nixon. I know from talking to and going back to the Union Board reunions that many other students, all the other members of that participated in Union Board, have had similar life-impacting and life-changing experiences.
I found that I could be an active changer of the world. I didn't know that going into college. I really feel like that grew in me as a result of my experience with Union Board. Is not only can I think about doing something, or can I learn about doing something, or what other people have done, but I actually can make a difference. And that is still a part of who I am.
Union Board taught me a lot of things. Organization, budgeting, all of that, sure. But what it really taught me was the absolute joy of a life lived where you get to give to others in some way through creativity.
It's changing with the times, but remembering what our mission is. I don't think our mission will ever change. We will continue to be what I would call the community center of Indiana University. And community is going to be even more important in the future. How do we build community? We're entering a time when we're somewhat apart and isolated, and so we've got to have a place that respects freedoms, diversity, all of these things. And that's got to be reflected in our programs, and I'm sure it will be.